this video is focused on using standardized and standards-based tests, and the focus is having the people who watch this video be able to use the standardized test results and understand it. And simply, if you're asked a question about it, the development of standardized tests or why this kind is chosen, to be able to answer it. And there's so much to cover. Obviously everything can't be covered, but I think I'm going over much of the needed information and the basics here. What we're doing today in this video is what are standardized tests, defining it, the types of tests, preparation, administration, and ethics and how they should be administered, and interpreting results. So first, what is a standardized test? They are tests which the procedures, administration, materials, and scoring have fixed rules, so that it's possible that the assessment so that as far as possible the assessment will be the same at different times and places. So the test would be identical in different classrooms in different cities, different states, and so on. Alright, it should be scored, interpreted in a standard and predetermined manner, designed to yield either norm-referenced or criterion-referenced inferences. Should be constructed primarily of selected response items. And there's side note, there's staggering differences in the level of effort associated with this compared to a common classroom test. In other words, if students don't see the immediate benefit, they oftentimes don't work as hard, especially when these tests get really, really long. The student thinks, well, what's in it for me to do better? I'd rather just put my head down and sleep, so they just scribble something down. And we all know this can be a problem, and so students do need to see the immediate benefits. So the standardized test can include state or district mandated tests, and include state achievement tests that can be customized for state standards. It can include benchmark tests, RTI tests, which are the response to intervention, early childhood assessments, and English language proficiency tests, amongst others. So there's different types. The multi-level survey batteries. These are the survey of general education growth or basic skill development. They're multi-level, meaning the test content spans several grade levels. A battery, which is the several curricular areas, are assessed by different subtests. These are administered annually, and they are norm referenced. Now, when standardized tests are norm referenced, the national samples of students have been used as the norming group for interpreting relative standing. Because of the norms, teachers can compare different areas of achievement to find the strengths and weaknesses. There's the multi-level criterion reference tests. These provide detailed information about student status for a well-defined domain of performance in a single subject area. They can span several grade levels, or they do span several grade levels, and are ideally are aligned with state standards, and they inform students' knowledge on the specific learning objectives. So remember, the criterion referenced are those that are based on the very specific learning objectives, while the multi-level tests for a single curricular area, these tend to be deeper and broader than the survey tests, and they should be used to compare performance in 2 or more areas. And they're usually not normed on the same population. The single-level test for one course or subject area. These assess achievement only at one educational level for one course, such as the Algebra 1 test or the 7th grade health test. These are often called the end-of-course exams or end-of-course finals, and for most purposes, the teacher-made test for a subject is more appropriate than these. Now, the standardized tests do have use to the classroom. Oftentimes, teachers look at these testing as a burden, and they can be, especially when there is way too much testing, or the testing don't yield educational benefits. So when the feedback comes quickly, and the feedback allows teachers to modify their teaching, to differentiate their teaching, and for the parents to help out and the students to apply in different areas, that's when it's most beneficial. If the testing is only used at the end of the year, the information comes back much, much later, then it doesn't do any good. All it does, and then it's often used to punish the teacher. Well, we have to remember that teachers aren't the only ones that factor in the student learning. They are important, there's no denying that, but so is the student's effort, so is the environment, so are the parents. So there's a lot of different factors in. So to make the standardized test useful, it has to have a quick turnaround on the grading, or I should say the results. And then if it's the benchmark test, the teachers can use those to modify, change grouping, change strategies, go back and reteach to certain students that have missed things. And if it's at the end of the year, we've had times where the teachers get back these scores while the next school year has already started. They didn't even get to plan in the summer. As a coach myself, I think that many teachers can go about the testing better. They often we need to teach the standards. We also need to make sure and ideally the standards are aligned with the test, and the test measures the standards. If there's a misalignment and the teacher knows that, the teacher should plan for the standards, teach the standards, and then teach whatever supplemental the teacher knows is going to be on the test. And then when you think about how a coach plans out the season, they want to win the individual games or meets, and they want to peak at that championship season. The end of the seasons where those tournaments are, when those championships are. That's when the athletes should be peaking. That's what we want in the classroom. We don't have our hardest workouts right before the championship meet or the championship game. What we're doing in those practices is we're reviewing, we're tapering down, and it's very purposeful. The classroom teacher should do the same thing. The classroom teacher should build up, have the students do well on the assessments throughout the season, and then have reviews right before. And then going into the test, they should do some of those things that we know work. I sat and I've given these tests, and I've proctored them, and I've observed them, and I've been on many different roles. But I see these teachers, when the student goes to take the test, the first thing they do is they walk in, hand out these tests, and hand out the pencils, and the students start taking them. It's like, well, we already know students do better when they get a little blood flowing. They stretch a little bit, move around a little bit. I'm not talking about an aggressive game of tag, but just simple yoga, simple movement. Why are we not doing some of those things that we know work right before the test? So let's learn from the coaches that that they have kind of perfected this preparing for the championship. Let's do some of those things in the classroom as well. When it comes to ethics, the teacher wants to do well, and it's probably most important to the teacher. Sometimes the student cares, sometimes they don't. I've been a part of classes where if the student passes this Algebra 1 final, then they pass the course. If they don't, they don't. But then I know of other times where the student had to take the test, but there was no ramifications. It made no difference to the student. Nothing happened to the student if they did well, did poorly. It didn't change anything. Matter of fact, I've known students who purposely did badly because if they did badly, they got to go in the easy subject next year. They didn't want the advanced English. They wanted the regular English. Matter of fact, they wanted the simplest English class or the simplest math. So it was in their benefit, from their point of view, to do badly on this test. So we need to think about that. But when it comes to the ethics, it's okay for the teacher to teach learning objectives when the learning objectives are in line with the standards, which are in line with the assessment. And the teacher shouldn't narrow down those to only the ones they know appear on the assessment. The teacher should teach all the standards. And as I mentioned before, if there's something that is on the test that's not on the standards and the teacher knows that, it's not bad for the teacher to teach that, as long as the teacher ethically knows that, or moral, I should say, in a fair way knows that it's on the test. So if the teacher saw in advance a copy of the test and then taught it, that's not fair. That's obviously cheating. But if every year there's we know this test question's out there, that's something to consider. I say that, and I'm walking a bit of a line, and I need to be careful because teachers are not allowed to ask the students what was on the test. and then change from that. So you know, so I don't want to be accused of cheating or promoting cheating in any way so when I make that. It's very fair and reasonable for a teacher to teach general test taking strategies and integrating a variety of test taking formats throughout the school year. If the final test or the standardized test is a multiple choice, it shouldn't be the first time students ever seen multiple choice. So those teachers can have the kind of questions that look like those on the final exam. That's perfectly reasonable. It's inappropriate to give the students the exact same kind of tests, the exact same questions that are on the standardized test. And if the teacher were to do this, then we don't get accurate test results. We're not able to do anything with that information because we haven't really learned if the students have learned anything or not. It's questionable, it's kind of debatable how it's implemented, is teaching only those learning objectives that specifically match the objectives that will appear on the standardized assessment your students will teach. So the teacher needs to understand the results when they come back. I can't provide a copy of every kind of result, and especially because we have such a wide range of grades and even different states that our teachers teach in. But the basics need to be understood. Going back to middle school math really here with a lot of this, but it's important, and it's not a bad idea to have a reminder. The mean is the fancy way of saying the average within the set of scores. The median is the midpoint in the set of scores. So in the number set 4, 5, 5, 7, 9, 5 is the number that is in the midpoint. It has 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So it's the median. The mode, actually not on the screen, but is the number that is given the most. That is not too relevant to standardized test scores, but it's always mentioned in measures of central tendency, so I'm throwing that in here. The range, the highest score to the lowest score. Again, in my data set 4, 5, 5, 7, 9. The range of the scores is actually 5 because it's the difference between 9, the highest, and 4, the lowest. And the standard deviation, that's probably what people are most confused about. It's how far the score is from the mean of the other set of scores. The standard deviation is the average deviation in a set of scores. And larger standard deviations, which are relative to the mean, indicate there's a greater range in the scores. So you can't say, hey, I have a standard deviation of 50. Is that good or bad? Well, it depends. It depends on the mean. It depends on the range and the other variables. So when somebody understands the standard deviation, then the mean and the student's score compared to the mean means a lot more. If somebody tells me, well, I scored a 60 and the average score was a 50, and I kind of want to know, well, what was the standard deviation? You know, how does this really compare when we're looking at this, comparing it to the other students? And the absolute interpretation scores, the score represents what students can do, and it represents some degree of mastery, while the relative interpretation, it compares students to other students. Interpretive options, you can look at the percentiles, the grade equivalents, and the scale scores. Percentiles, most people have a pretty easy understanding with. There's has the relative interpretation. It compares the student score with those of other students in the norm group. And there are on national tests, they'll have nationally normed groups, and in local tests, they'll have the locally normed groups. And this indicates the percentage of students in the norm of the group that the students outperformed. So of the students in the 96th percentile, the student has beaten 96% of the students in that test. Very frequently used for a relative score, easy to understand. However, it relies on the quality of the norm group. Grade equivalent scores, we've seen these, it's probably most often used with reading groups. So you say, my child reads on a 5th grade level. Now, sometimes used with math. It estimates the grade level the student would be on. Now, it's important to realize just because it says the students reads at the 5th grade level doesn't mean they're ready for all 5th grade subjects. It's simply saying that it's reading at the same level. Now, 2 assumptions are made here. Assumption is made that the subject area tested is equally emphasized at each grade level, Another assumption is that student mastery increases at a constant rate. And the most complicated of these are the scale scores. These are useful for developing equally different forms of the same test. The scores on two tests of differing difficulty levels can be statistically adjusted so that when placed on a converted score scale, the new scores represent students' performances as if the two tests have been equally difficult. This can be used for skills tests that can be taken more than once. Now, the main benefit here is there's lots of statistical advantages. When you're doing scale scores, the statisticians out there can do all sorts of fun stuff with this. It's sometimes not even shared with parents because this can be complicated, and it can be used for longitudinal tracking of student progress. The scale scores can be used to make direct comparisons among classes, schools, and school districts. Common scale stored items are the TCAP, and doing this allows us to have the TVOS value-added scores. I'm not going to get in that debate now, but I say that because every time you mention TVOS, there's the teachers that kind of get bitter because they kind of hate it, and I understand that and definitely see their arguments. There's the Praxis, which those of us in the world of education all know, ACT and SAT. And I say that because think of the ACT score. If you tell somebody they scored a 35 on the ACT, somebody that doesn't know anything about the ACT might think, oh, a 35 out of 100, that's not very good. But anybody that knows the ACT knows that this ACT is scored up to a 36, and a 35 is a phenomenal score. So, and when you take the ACT, you typically take it multiple times, trying to get a better score each time. And some schools allow you to take the best score from each section if you take it multiple times, and some schools don't. And that's because of the scaled scores. A score of 35 on the ACT means something. Going back to the screen again, now that I've covered them, might better understand that and kind of compare these. Instructionally diagnostic tests. They find individual strengths and weaknesses within multiple subjects, allowing teachers to modify future instruction and make educational decisions. They make inferences about the status of individual test takers and can diagnose strengths, weaknesses, or both. They produce actionable grain-size instructional results, and they differ in quality. Now, to determine the quality on these diagnostic tests, they need to check. The teacher should check how they're aligned with curricular aims. The teacher should check to see that the test contains significant items that accurately measure the student achievement of the targets. The test items must be well written, and the test should be easy to use and implement. The standardized tests are tests for which the procedures, administration, materials, and scoring rules are fixed so that the possible of assessment is the same at different times and places. There's the different types: the multi-level survey batteries, multi-level criterion reference test, multi-level test for a single curricular area, and single-level test for one course or subject area. State or district managed tests include state achievement tests customized to standards, interim or benchmark tests, response to intervention assessments, early childhood assessments, and English language proficiency test. Non-standardized achievement tests do not report empirical evidence of their development, quality, or effectiveness. Standardized tests results can be used both within and without the classroom, and the use of standardized tests must be used appropriately and not be manipulated. As I said in the beginning, there's a lot of information here, and I try my best to cover the highlights with the main goal of a teacher can adequately prepare for the standardized test, analyze the results appropriately to modify instruction and to best meet the needs of the students, and very importantly, be able to answer questions from the public and from parents and students about what this means.